I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Today on Hard Knocks, we have Liv Boeree, an astrophysicist by training, a former professional poker player known as the Iron Maiden, now a science communicator, writer, speaker, and founder of Raising for Effective Giving, a nonprofit promoting effective altruism in the poker community. In this conversation, we talk a lot about decision-making, reinvention, personal growth, a little bit about resilience and emotional mastery, but a lot of trying to think about how systems incentivize us to be winners, losers, or how to find win-win solutions to seemingly zero-sum realities. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Liv Boeree, for those who may not be familiar with who you are, although they should be, who are you?
So I guess I'm best known for being a professional poker player. I did that for a very long time. Nowadays, I'm kind of working as, also a fellow podcaster, but I sort of do research on the intersection of game theory, technology, and particularly around AI. How do we design the incentive systems under which we operate, building very powerful technologies? Because right now we are going about it in kind of a sketchy way. Yes, that's kind of my main shtick right now.
Okay, that's fascinating. I'm going to ask you a little bit about that. But I think I want to start by talking about competitiveness. So in what I've read of you, I've heard you refer to yourself as being pathologically competitive. Why do you say that?
So certainly when I was younger, I would say I was pathologically competitive in that if there was some kind of, not even a contest, but like when I was in high school, for example, any sport, I was always I had to be team captain, or at least I wanted to be team captain. I always wanted us to win, which is usually a good thing for a team captain, obviously. I was good at trying to get people to care. But I would also be competitive in terms of what exam, where did I rank against my classmates in a particular test? I was always sort of looking at an external. So my approach to competition was how do I stack up against other people that I consider to be my peers? And I always had to win. Even if it was games, I would just take games so seriously, whereas some people play to have fun. I'm no, I'm playing to win. And I would use the word pathological because it felt like it was such a deep part. It was almost like a visceral need. And it didn't always make me happy. And I don't think it was always healthy. Whereas nowadays, I'd like to say I'm a whatever the opposite of pathological competitive person is. I'm still competitive. I still love playing and trying to win, but it comes from more of a, I try and compete against myself more. How much better am I now than I was a month ago when I first started playing this game, as opposed to being how am I stacking up against my peers? So that was one way it's become healthier. But also, I'm more conscious of just other values in the things that we do other than just winning at a narrow goal. If I play poker, I'm is everyone having a nice time? Are we all learning something? Yes, it's nice if I win some money when I play, but I'm did I actually just have a good time while playing? Which is a hard to quantify thing. It's a hard to measure thing, but that's actually where I think the magic lies. And so that's a way that, competition is a neutral form of interaction. It can be very good for the world. It can be very bad for the world. And I've sort of gone through this sort of personal, almost I don't want to say spiritual awakening, but personal journey to develop a healthier approach to it. Because I do think that sort of unhealthy competitive drives and just poorly designed games are some of the biggest causes of strife on our planet right now.
Yeah, totally. I empathize with that because I think I am or have been the opposite of what is the pathologically competitive, where for me, I was always the one who wanted to have fun at the game. And when I felt like there was conflict arising because of the game, I would be like, "Oh no, this is bad." And so yeah, so like I love that you're so a few of the things that you mentioned pinged me. One of which is because I have two young children, I watch Bluey a lot, and one of the episodes that we watched recently was this one where are you familiar with Bluey? All the characters are dogs. That's the most important thing. They're all dogs, and in this one episode, they figure out like basically they decide one of the characters decides that she wants a duck cake for her birthday. She wants a duck-shaped cake for her birthday. And her dad's like, how do you know that you want a duck-shaped cake? And she was like, well, when I thought of a duck-shaped cake, my tail wagged. And that's how I know I'm happy. And like part of the sort of like takeaway of the story is, how does anyone who doesn't have a tail know that they're happy? Like how do we quantify our own happiness and learn to recognize it when we don't have a tail that wags? And I thought that was like a very amazing insight. But yeah, you're pointing to, I think, two interesting issues with competitiveness, one of which is internal and the other is external, right? Like, what is your internal experience of the game, and could you be competitive with yourself? That's called discipline. That is the process of getting better at something, versus how are you interacting externally, and is that bringing conflict to a scenario? Is that winning at all costs? And for me in my life, I have always been on this journey of attempting to find win-win solutions to difficult problems that are seemingly incompatible with win-win solutions. And, you know, your podcast is called Win-Win. And so I really want to talk about what it is about a win-lose versus a win-win kind of competition, and how do you think about those in terms of quantifying them, but also approaching them strategically?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's always very situationally dependent. And part of the thing with competitions is that, like, where do you draw the boundary, right? What defines a competition? So again, coming back to the poker example, that is technically a win-lose game by the strictest sense. It's zero sum. When I win chips off someone else, that's because they're coming from someone else's chip stack, you know? And so under those conditions, it's purely, if you just look at the monetary amount, it is a win-lose thing. But as you said, there are always like these sort of downstream effects of whatever it is we're doing, whether it's a game or like business endeavor, a conversation we're having with our family. There are always downstream effects. And the question is, how do you measure whether those effects are actually positive or negative? So it's very, very hard to, there's no like formal strict definition. To me, when I think of something like win-win, like there's kind of two ways of going about it. It's like, how do you, and we can get into this more, but like, how do you design the incentives whereby like the short-term things that people are optimizing for to try and, you know, get ahead, let's say, like whether it's getting market share in their company or so on, making money, are those short-term incentives, if everybody follows them, aligned with the good of the whole? If they are aligned, then that would be a kind of win-win game, because it's a race. It creates a race to the top for everybody. But if those short-term incentives, if everyone follows them, are misaligned with what's good for the whole, so an example would be the race, you know, companies trying to, so you have a bunch of farmers on the edge of an old growth rainforest, and they're all trying to like stay, you know, keep afloat, keep their farms afloat. And one of the ways they could do that is to get more land to farm. So, well, there's this rainforest here, no one really owns it, so I could go cut this down and get more land for my farm. And even if someone's like, well, I know that's kind of icky, but if I don't do it, everyone else is going to do it anyway, so I might as well do it too. That's an example where these short-term incentives of like grow your business creates if everybody follows it, creates this very negative effect for the wider world, which is there's no more rainforest, and
Right.
we need rainforest, like we need biodiversity, we need all these various ecological things to keep this sort of system habitable for the long term. So when you get these short-term misaligned incentives for the long-term whole, that's when you get these race to the bottom, like lose omni-lose games, where in the long run everyone is worse off for the competition from happening. And then you also have the other sort of piece of the pie, which is the mindset that people bring to the competitive field that they're in. If people are actively going about, like as you said, trying to bring a win-win mindset to everything that they do, then you're more likely to find these kind of creative solutions that it takes to sort of break out of these seemingly like zero-sum traps. So I'm not sure if that specifically answers your question, but it's to find win-win solutions requires both a sort of like intuitive, like staking a claim in the ground, like I'm going to go out and look for something whereby not only do I benefit, but everyone else benefits from it too. And then also how to actually design the incentives such that we don't just sort of end up in these race to the bottom spirals.
Mm. Yeah, I'm thinking about how even in the best, poker movies, there's often there's the game that's actually happening, and then there's the broader game of what are the relationships between these people, and maybe the guy who wins all the chips doesn't end up actually walking away with the girl. Like maybe that's how there's like these win-lose scenarios, but it depends again on how you're defining what is the scope of what is actually won. I'm curious to know, like, in your own personal life, like, I know that you're thinking about this in terms of bigger systems, and I am interested in knowing more about that because I think that is actually a really interesting issue for how we think about resolving bigger issues that are bigger than ourselves. But like on a more personal level, like, can you give an example of how you approached a potentially like win-lose zero-sum situation, but were able to turn it into a win-win situation?
Actually, quite recently, I quit playing poker full-time about 5-6 years ago, and basically not played much. I'd play like once a year in like the World Series of Poker tournament just for a bit of fun. But in last December, I got invited to go down and play another big tournament that I would never normally have gone and played. And I had some other work on, and I was like trying to work on my podcast, and like, I was like, oh, this is a distraction. I'm just giving this whole spiel about how we need to just play win-win games and like look for the positive sum, etc. Am I really going to go and give a bunch of time to this zero-sum game again? So the night before in the end, I decided to go play, and I was like, I'm going to find a way to make this clearly positive. And I was like, what is an issue that I'm really, really concerned about in the world that I want to fix? And I'd recently been like digging into factory farming and just how horrific it is. And in particular, like the way most pigs are farmed in America, it's like would make your hair curl if you knew what was happening. It's like the way they're treated would like, if you put a dog, they put in these little tiny cages that are so narrow that they can never turn around. And they'll live like that for their whole lives, pretty much.
Oh my God.
Mother pigs. They're called gestation crates. And some states have voted to ban them a while ago, but most of where pig farming is done, like Iowa and the Midwest, it's completely standard practice. And no one really knows about it. Or if they do know, they just like, la, la, la. So anyway, I was like really bummed out about this. And like, this is an issue I would really like to make a meaningful difference to. And it's very underfunded. There's like a few like sort of activist-y orgs trying to do stuff, but they don't get much money. So I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to donate 20% of whatever I cash in this tournament to these orgs that are doing the best, these charities that are doing the best impact on trying to solve this problem. And because in my head, I was like, well, if I do win, then that would be a classic win-win, right? I get some nice money. Okay, technically it's coming from other people, so it's not win-win in the strict omni sense, but that way I know that the money is going to go to a very important cause. And then I end up having the biggest score of my life. Like I end up fourth in the tournament for multiple millions of dollars. So, the sort of the takeaway here is I don't know, maybe, and I also played the best I had ever played, I think. That was what was so crazy. Like, I had such a motivation because I felt so in alignment with what I was trying to do. I'd found a way to like essentially change the incentives of the game. Well, not the incentives, but like the consequences of what I was about to do into something strictly win-win. And I just played with my entire heart and soul, and it worked out. And so then I had like $500,000, over $500,000 to donate to these causes that would, like, you know, it was just the best. It's like the best thing I could imagine. So yeah, that's one particular example. It's like, and what it does is basically, it's just like, it just takes a bit of creativity, a little bit of like thinking out the box of like how, you know, what can I do a little bit differently whereby this is going to like strictly benefit some other third party that would not have been considered otherwise.
Okay, so again, that widening of the scope, broadening of the consequences. What about cooperation versus competition? Like, how would you like in situations where they are seemingly strictly competitive, how do you introduce the idea of cooperation? Is it possible?
Yeah, I mean, it you know, again, it depends on the definition of the game that you're playing. Like, you just can't, it's against the rules of poker to cooperate. It's literally, you will get kicked out of a tournament if you are seen to be like colluding, or even like saying to another player, hey, like you and I work together to get this person. That is just against what is the spirit of the game. And like, you would be looked at as an unethical person for doing that. But that's because that is a very contained universe with very strict rules. In the wider world, you know, like you know, there are other places where, you know, there are other things you might do where it's a strict norm, like the idea of competing would be absolutely looked down upon. So it's really hard to sort of answer like in a you know, there's a specific rule of thumb. I mean, I will say that whatever system we end up moving to, because I've been like wrestling a lot with like, you know, in many ways I'm deeply pro-capitalism because we're living the best lives we could be thanks to it. It has created so much wealth and prosperity and innovation. And yet at the same time, because of the sort of setup of everything, because we haven't found a way to actually like price into the market the true value of these non-replaceable resources we have on Earth. Again, like coming back to the idea of a forest, you know, the markets look at a forest by the price of its lumber. You know, you get a tree, how much can be, if we chop this down, how much can we sell this on the lumber market for? And that's completely ignoring all of these other hard to quantify like metrics, these values that it has, like the soil, keeping the soil quality, preventing floods, biodiversity, etc., oxygen, you know, CO2 sequestration. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Team, what was your question again? You can cut these bits where I stumble.
Yeah,
right?
no.
Okay,
no.
good.
So I was just asking about. So you were talking about how when you're thinking in terms of applying these principles, it's difficult to quantify because you're saying, okay, well, the cost of the tree is this, but it's not taking into consideration that, and because it's difficult to quantify, and so therefore.
Oh yeah, I was talking about capitalism. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And so it's failing to quantify the value of the wider system, and that's the inherent flaw of capitalism. It's just not taking. It just optimizes for narrow metrics, and no one is being a psychopath for doing that. It's just like the way that the game is set up, the way that the economic system is set up, and so we really have to find. We have to redesign it if we want to keep, because we are on a finite planet, and yes, we might be able to expand into space and like bring in asteroids and so on, but we ain't doing that anytime soon.
No,
we're doing the rate of extraction is far exceeding the natural world's ability to replenish itself. That's also happening amongst humans. If you look at like how humans are behaving, interfacing the digital world now, like it's extractive capitalism all the way down. These companies are extracting our attention, And they are leaning into more and more addictive methods, more personalized addictive methods of keeping you hooked to their app. Again, because that's, the companies themselves are actually technically psychopaths. They have no end state. They're like kind of, they've been described as like, they're kind of like a cancerous growth that like they just have to keep growing and growing and growing with no end point and no consideration of like the wider ecosystem. So yeah, probably a bit of a sort of
No. But
different direction.
but we're getting into this interesting issue of like trying to create systems that aren't going to replicate those same issues. So how are you thinking about that in terms of broader, how are you broadening that scope? And like, what are the limits within your thinking about these kinds of ruling, like rules and applying these ideas?
So like, this is purely intuitive, a gut feel that I have. But like whatever system we end up designing, it needs to have the wisdom to know when to be competing and when to be collaborating. And the meta skill we all need to be developing as much as possible is like being able to spot which modality is the correct one for the given circumstances. Which again is why games are so useful. I'm actually trying to design a game right now that like teaches this principle. It's again how to design a scoring system though that will do it. But that's because so many people feel like, oh well, because the excesses of capitalism have gotten to where we are, then it's competition is the bad guy. But it's not. It's just like you need to have competition constrained, whereby like you can. If the externalities start to get a little bit too negative, you can go, okay, that's enough. Now we need to sort of step out of that and just collaborate again. How to do that is way beyond my pay grade. For people who are really interested into like digging into it, I would recommend going on the Game B Wikipedia. They have a Game B wiki. It's this whole movement about like redesigning capitalism into this more like sustainable thing that again like takes account of the whole. But the best systems are ones that will use both modalities in a very intelligent way. And you'll always have to be constantly, there'll be always new problems coming up and you'll be having to constantly adjust. It's not like you can perfectly say, oh, it's going to be 80% cooperation and 20% competition. There will always be new edge cases and it will always need to evolve. So yes, no one size fits all answer.
Interesting. Okay. Do you think that these questions are easier to answer on a bigger scale or a smaller, like an individual person scale? Like if I were to ask you questions about like how to apply game theory to life, would it be easier, do you think, for you to apply them to humanity or to individual humans?
I mean, generally speaking, it would be easier to do to individuals because, you're having to, it's easier to model an interaction between 3 people than it is between 5. The more agents or nodes you add to a thing, the more, sort of you get this combinatorial explosion and it becomes harder to sort of model it and also predict it. That said, when you get beyond a sort of certain scope, beyond a certain scale, then you can start to sort of, people will start to almost behave as clusters again. Like you can geopolitics, right? If you're trying to predict whether China is going to invade Taiwan or whatever, you don't need to model every person within China and Taiwan and how they're going to behave. You could again, you can sort of turn it into like these larger super organisms and how are those super organisms going to compete with one another or interact. And that's also game theory, right? It doesn't always have to be about individual humans. But I mean, really like what game theory is, it's just a branch of economics dealing with like payoffs and rewards and incentives. And how do you model them? And the reason why, games are used is because games are these little simplified contained universes where you can minimize all the different variables. The real world is just so messy and inherently unpredictable because of there's just there's just so many little factors. No one's been able to simulate it. At the same time, that's what AI companies are trying to do, right? They're essentially trying to build better and better simulators.
So you mentioned that in capitalism, one of the biggest issues with it is that there are these hard to quantify variables that are not because they're hard to quantify, they're not really counted within the system of variables that determines growth and, cost benefit analysis. What is the equivalent in an individual person's life? Like, what are the difficult to quantify variables? Is it emotions? Like, what is that?
Yeah. How do you put a price on having a healthy relationship with your children? How do you could look at it as, number of happy hours you spend together. That's actually a decent metric. But it's still not perfect, because it's like, well, define happy.
Right.
Like where we're just blissed out. You could. This is the difficulty when we're like talking about like building super powerful AIs, where it's like people are like, oh, just tell it like maximize everyone's happiness. It's like, well, define. Is someone happy because they are lost in a sea of just like watching a really good TV show for the last 24 hours straight? Like, technically that's a happy state. They're smiling, they're laughing, it's a comedy show. But we all intuitively feel like that's missing something if that's all somebody did. We need to have like these moments of struggle, or like overcoming, like, moments where we can be dignified, like overcome a problem. And most people, when they think of like raising children, you want to create little people who are self-actualized and have not insurmountable challenges, but some amount of challenge. So yeah, you start getting into these like very nebulous words that are inherently hard to quantify. So to sort of tie that back with your question, yeah, it's. Sorry, I'm having like an off day. It's so hard today. Your question was, just reiterate it to me.
Well, if the hard to quantify variables in capitalism are these things that are not like factored into the equation, what would be the equivalent in an individual person's life? And you're right, like these are those variables, like these are hard to quantify variables. Like, you could be taking your kids to Disneyland, but if you're yelling at them the whole time, then nobody's having a good time, and you're, like that kind of thing. So, yeah. So I'm like, I'm torn between wanting to talk to you about like this broader issue, because I do think that people are really concerned with how the broader clusters of like ideology and nationality are clashing with each other in the world, and how to think about approaching that. But typically I tend to talk to people about how to apply various kinds of philosophy and wisdom to their own personal life. Yeah. And so maybe I'm going to pull you back and bring you back to the personal, if that's okay with you. Yeah.
No,
okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, you're famously a poker player, but that's not the only thing that you've been. You've been an astrophysicist. You've talked about science and you do philanthropy. And I'm wondering, like, if you were to gamify your life, like, what is the connecting tissue that has sort of guided how you are approaching these transitions and these transformations? And do you view, like, first of all, are you winning at your life, and like, why?
Yeah, so I mean, the term winning is obviously such a loaded term, because it's so subjective. Like, how do we, how do we even
is
define...
your tail wagging?
Exactly. Is my tail wagging? And honestly, that is one of the biggest ways I decide what I'm going to do. I've had so many different career transitions. I was originally planning to become a researcher I wanted to be an astronomer, or at least working in astrophysics. And I graduated university, and I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to just take it like I'll take a gap year just to like learn a little bit about the world, but I'm definitely going to go do a master's and then a PhD. But then I would hang out around PhD students, and they all, I don't know, they just seemed very depressed. And my tail was not wagging when I was around them. So then I like somehow like fell into poker, and whenever I went and played poker, my tail was wagging, and it just was so strong. Like I was like, okay, clearly this seems like a better fit for my personality, at least right now. But at some point, after playing poker for sort of 12 years, I noticed it was becoming a grind. I was no longer, my tail was never wagging. I was like constantly sort of chasing this like ideal of myself as being a sort of top professional, badass, cold calculating machine. But internally, I didn't feel like that anymore. And I wasn't having any joy in the game. And, it definitely took me longer to quit it than I would have liked. Like, I think realistically, I should have quit in 2015, 2016. But I sort of limped along for another 4 years, where I was like barely breaking even, or not even sometimes. So, yeah, like it really, has been sort of I'm very much for making big life decisions, it's very much a sort of a carrot type person. Like what is the reward? Does this make me happy? Am I excited? Can I not stop thinking about it? Okay, then I'll go do that. But for short-term things like getting stuff done, because as you may have noticed, I often love living in an abstract world, and like lots of ideas, but I'm not so good at the execution. And so I've often needed I've had to gamify systems, where I have like a stick. If you don't get this done by this date, this bad thing is going to happen. You may know him, Tim Urban. I think you
yeah, of course,
right?
Yeah.
Like him and I, he was struggling to get his book done by a certain time. So I was like, okay, what is your least favorite organization on earth? And he was like, oh, this one. I was like, okay, if you don't get it done by this date, you're going to have to donate this much money to them. Do you agree?
Oh no!
He won't let me tell you the story because we've talked about it before publicly. And he agreed to it, and he got it done. And I was like, why am I not using this? Why am I giving it to him? I should be using this for myself.
That's fabulous.
And so I've tried using donations to things I don't like, but more I try and what I find useful personally is I hate letting people down that I promised something to by a certain date. So I'll tell some dear friends or someone I just really care about, hey, I need to give you this thing by this time. And if I don't do it, please, make me feel guilty. So for me, actually the guilt is a good way of gamifying getting it done. Because otherwise I'm just like a horrific procrastinator. So yeah, it's, I think for the really big life stuff of what do I want to do? I need to feel excited by it, but it doesn't matter how excited I am about actually getting, when it comes to breaking this big nebulous goal down into little tasks, I need to use negative incentives, punishments, basically, to get it done. Otherwise, I'll just sit on my lazy ass.
Can I ask about that transition out of poker and the fact that you spent longer doing it than you should have? Because I think that that's something that everyone can relate to. We've either been in a job that we should have been out of, or we in a relationship that we should have been out of. I've absolutely been there. And I'm a firm believer in pivoting. I'm a huge believer in the impermanence of things. Who knows why? It's just one of those fundamental principles of the universe to me. And so I don't feel attachments per se to certain career choices or even relationships necessarily. I think the one thing that's become super, super permanent to me is just being a mom. Of all relationships in the world that I will always and forever be, no matter what, it's a mom. And it's sort of jarring to me that something is so absolutely permanent to my identity that way. But how does you what wisdom can you offer about learning to recognize that it's time to pivot? Is it simply like checking in to see if your tail is wagging? Is that enough? Or is there, I mean, there's also some times where you have to persist in something even when it's not so fun in order, that's called discipline. That's how you arrive at being better at a thing. So how do you learn to tell the difference between this is not for me anymore versus this is just something I need to continue, working at because I've committed to it?
Yeah,
And
I
is
think.
that an animal crawling along the floor behind you? I see
Oh,
something slowly.
it is. This is my skink, Frank. Hi, darling. Hi, buddy. Where have you been? Sorry, because I guess that's going to be distracting for the viewers. Yeah, I'll just show them to you.
I was just like, what is that?
He's a funny man. I let him out of his cage during the day because he likes to run
So
around.
cute.
Yeah,
I was like, is that a baby alligator? I hope that's a baby alligator.
He's like the creature that evolution forgot. He's half snake, half lizard. He's got these tiny little legs, but he's kind of like a chode
Oh
snake.
my gosh.
He's a funny man.
Cutie.
I'll just put him out. For me, the difficulty in quitting poker was so much of my ego was wrapped up in the idea of like Liv Boeree, the professional poker player. Like who would I be if I wasn't continuing to be that? And I think that was the great lesson, is just like learning that skill of being able to check in and be like, why am I trying to get this done? Am I getting it done? Like, because that was a very selfish thing ultimately, right? Again, like coming back to this win-win philosophy, where is the win-win in me limping along in a thing that it's not like once upon a time I did set the goal of like, I need to be the number one, female poker player, or I think that was one of my goals, which I think is a spurious goal looking back on it. But, at one point I set that commitment. Did I completely achieve it? Not quite. I got very, very close. But, I wasn't even still continuing to play for, to adhere to that. It was because I was kind of chasing after this appearance of being this thing, this. I guess for thinking again, it's like getting respect from the outside world, and that's what I viewed as like an important thing. And when I eventually sort of checked in enough, and I'm like, is that actually where I want to be getting respect from? Would I be proud of myself when I'm 90, looking back and going like, okay, I spent however many decades of my life pursuing that one thing? No, I wouldn't. So it's like, I think that would be kind of the rule of thumb. Am I doing this for like purely selfish, egoic reasons, or largely, because it's not always that clear? And that eventually did sort of start to stick out. I was using these other excuses like, oh, well, I'm trying to raise money for charity. And I mean, I was like, literally, like at the time we had an organization that was donating to various top causes, not factory farming, but it was all kind of cope to just keep limping along in this thing that I felt like I needed to win more as well. Like I was like, I need to get to this particular number, like I need to have this many cashes on my record, etc. And it was just really all in service of my ego wanting to be adored for this thing that it once upon a time decided was a very admirable thing. And again, though, it's not all downside. Like, I'm trying to grow my podcast, for example. Like, why am I doing that? Like the main purpose was, it was like, I want to talk to really smart people about how they're going about designing new, like trying to create win-win things. But also, I like the idea of having a big successful podcast. I like the idea of being a big successful podcaster. And I think that's, again, okay to have, but if at any point I'm doing it because and that is the primary metric that is overtaken, now it is time to get out of that game. Like I'm not doing it for the right reasons anymore.
So what are the right reasons to do anything?
So again, extremely subjective question. Like I have two core philosophies, core aphorisms that I like to follow, like, or axioms. One is like it's my favorite quote by this philosopher, Forrest Landry, which is, love is that which enables choice. So I
Okay.
interpret that as like, a truly loving act is one where you encourage others, you help others become and empower them to be able to make the best possible choices for themselves. Which obviously like ties in with parenting. Like what is a
Sure,
great parent?
absolutely.
Like in raising your children, empowering them to be smart and wise and kind so that they can make the best possible choices for themselves. If they do that, then that's like these ripple effects that will go on. So that's one. And then the other one is like, the best games are not the ones where you get satisfaction from like winning and that in the end, but the highest games we can play are ones which enable everyone else to keep playing as many games as possible. So it's kind of like overlap. It's like a game theory interpretation of the love is that which enables choice. So those are my personal sort of guiding principles of what I'll doing. Am I aligned with those principles? That would be like, yes, okay, I'm on the right path. But that's just mine. Like it's something like, that's where I think people trying to wrestle with this. This is what spirituality practice is about. Whether it's meditating, whether it's going to church, whatever your thing is, atheist, not, or very religious, getting in touch with whatever your real core inner values are. It could be like maximizing fun for everybody. It could be protecting the biosphere, whatever that thing is. But if you can pick out what your sort of North Star is, or it might be a few of them, and just constantly practice like checking in, am I doing that in alignment with that thing? That's where I think the sort of the most lasting fulfillment comes from.
How did you come upon your own principles? And I understand how you came upon the language of them, but what was it about empowering or supporting the most number of people that registered for you as being personally fulfilling?
Because I think, maybe it's I've had a pretty charmed life. And I wonder if this resonates with someone like you who's had like an extremely hard start to life. But to me, like, the average person is on net a positive for society. Maybe this is informed by me having a particularly charmed life where I haven't had any particularly difficult, heinous things happen to me. I'd be curious what your thoughts are. Do you want me to repeat my whole answer, or can I just jump back in? Because otherwise, I
Jump
feel like
back
it's
in.
okay.
Yeah, jump back in.
Yeah, I mean, but it really boils down to I do think most people are fundamentally good if they are given the right education and the right environment under which they can like grow and flourish. And so maximizing choice across an average population is just going to lead to more good stuff. Anything that can create like a sort of positive spiral effect, and empowering more people to go and do more good things is what is like the ultimate example of that. But really, I mean, I just remember I came across that quote. I have like a number of like different sort of thinkers who've really impacted my thinking. Daniel Schmachtenberger is one of them, and Forrest is another. I actually met them together, and I remember he gave me this little book he calls it like a book of collected wisdom. And I just sort of scrolled through it, and I think I even like let it open, which sounds weird, but I was like, just open what page? And it landed on that quote. That was the first quote I saw. I've since read through the whole book, and that quote is by far the one that like jumps out the most. It just feels, I don't even know how to describe it. It feels like it is touching on a deep fundamental truth. I mean, I believe he wrote it through like a lot of psychedelic journeys. And I am a big proponent of psychedelics. They have enabled me to like get in touch with the inner parts of myself that would have taken me so much longer to reach. And I used to be kind of an intuition skeptic, because, science and poker tend to be more like, there is they're very sort of left-brained. You need to think through things analytically. It's all very linear, etc. And intuitions are just kind of a result of if you accumulate enough data, then maybe you can get some good intuitions about something. And I do still agree with that. Like, I do think, generally speaking, the intuitions of someone who is very experienced in a field are going to be better than someone who is inexperienced. So there is some truth to that intuitions are based upon data. But I also think that there is some deeper, and I don't know how it works sort of physically or ontologically, but there is a way to connect to like some deeper source of knowing, whether it's just like somehow transmitted through our DNA or something is just like I don't know, man. But there have been these moments of insight that I've gotten to that I don't know how I would have gotten to them through conventional means. And that particular quote has, I think, come from that same place.
Well, it also seems like, you know what the experience of winning feels like. And it sounds like the more the merrier kind of vibes. Like just knowing how game theory works, their non-zero sum games are more tail waggy than zero sum games. And it's like, if I can experience this feeling of winning, I want other people to experience this feeling of winning. And I think that that's really cool. I mean, as someone who has had big losses in my life, that's a really interesting perspective, because like I feel like I know what that feels like, because up until I had a huge loss in my life, I had a very, everything's going great kind of life. Like, I had nothing to complain about in my life. Everything was great. I felt very loved. I felt very supported. I had all of my potential and everything ahead of me, and no traumas to speak of, until I had a very, very, very big trauma happened to me, and it sort of took over my life. And I got exposed to a lot of people who were, so basically I was like a winner of life, and then I was a big loser, right? And so I knew what it felt like to be a winner, and I knew what it felt like to be a loser. And then I when I was a loser, suddenly I found myself enmeshed, like deeply encircled by losers and people, like not loser, like not in that derogatory sense, but people who had losses, had traumas, were not winning at the game of life, and had never, like the vast majority of the people I was imprisoned with had never had that feeling of winning in their life. And I felt like in large part that was what ended up getting them into prison, was just this experience of loss after loss after loss after loss. And I'm wondering, like, does game theory say anything about how, like, if you're spiraling, like how losses can compound on each other, and how you might end up like spiraling in a circle of loss, and like how to get out of that? Because, I'm just thinking about how I decide, now that I've had the experience of winning and then the experience of losing, like one of the things that is a huge trap for someone like me is wanting to regain what we've lost. Like the feeling of what you have lost, you are trying to regain it, and you want to regain it by any means necessary. And that in itself is an illusion, because there are certain kinds of loss that you don't recover from. A certain kind of loss, you can only transform from them. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do. What's coming up for me hearing like you talk about that is because you had a point of comparison of like, oh no, this is how good life can be. And I wonder if it like expedited your recovery, essentially, because you're like, okay, I have this to work back to. For people who have been raised in such difficult conditions, where, as you say, like they've never experienced like just unconditional love. Most people from happy families, what is the secret ingredient there is kids who have unconditional love. They might get disciplined and, to different extents, but if you know that your parents will love you beyond anything and will be there for you, That is such like the ultimate gift. And for
That's
people
the ultimate win.
it's the ultimate win. It's the ultimate
Yeah.
win. It's like that. It's like this. It's this is like deep, not just sort of physical safety net, but like emotional safety net and so on, which enables you to be more like, it gives you breathing room to think about your choices and like make. You're not under like this pressure cooker. And when you hear of these people who like, you know, there's usually underlying anyone who ends up like going into a life of crime from a very early age, it's like because they were like literally fighting for survival. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like someone who's qualified to answer this question because I haven't looked into it. Like I can empathize with the situation, but I can't imagine what it's like to actually try and operate under those conditions. And what advice I would give. That said, it seems like sort of from what I've seen, and I've been flirting with like religion a lot more. I've been a diehard atheist my entire life, for most of my life, and I'm starting to see the like actual value in this idea of like religion and community, because really what it provides is community and this idea of unconditional love. When people talk about they met God or they feel God, it's like no matter what, there is something out there that loves me unconditionally. And so and I mean, you will know, I'm sure, a lot more about this, but like as a form of rehabilitation for like career criminals, you hear of them having like a religious awakening. That seems to be often the key thing, is like they find that source of unconditional love that they have never, ever been given. And giving people that as something to fall back on, is and that's something for adults that they have to discover. So yeah, I don't know if that like really sort of sufficiently answers the question, because again, it's really
Well, do you find in poker that if you lose a hand, it makes you more likely to lose the next hand? Like, is there something to that?
Yeah, you can. Yes. That on like we call it like being on tilt.
Okay.
Where you start to, one of the hardest things, because obviously with poker, it's a game of skill and luck, unlike chess.
Right.
Like if I screw up at
which is life.
Games, exactly. That's why it's such a good analog for life. Because there'll be times where you come away and you've like lost a bunch of money and you're like, well, your ego often, we have this saying, it's like, when I win, it's because I played great. And when I lose, it's because I got unlucky. Because our ego likes to sort of take credit for our successes and outsource blame for all of our losses. But like, what was I going to say?
You're talking about being on tilt.
Yes. And that's a really good point. Sorry, I had an intense weekend.
It had something to do with if you lose, you're more likely to lose the next time.
Right. Oh, yes. But one of the things that can happen is if you really go on a big losing streak where you are getting unlucky, you can start to feel this like sense of injustice, like the universe is conspiring against you. So it's actually a form of paranoia. But similarly, if you go on a big winning streak, you need to be honest with yourself whether that winning is because you played well or because you got lucky. But in either case, like I think we should have this word more in our lexicon, which is pronoia, believing that the universe is conspiring for us. Because again, it puts us into this more like, it gives us more breathing room. Again, it's like this idea of like, it's like almost a form of unconditional love. It gives us more breathing room to think more creatively and like handle little challenges when they do come up, or even bigger challenges.
Right. These challenges aren't challenges, they're opportunities. Yeah. Like
exactly. It's like, it's the classic positive thinking stuff, really. But yeah, poker, taught me my darkest times in poker came probably when I was getting a little bit unlucky, but then I started playing badly off the back of that, because then you're feeling both a paranoia about the game hates you and it's conspiring against you. And I mean, I know not all poker players think this way, but you hear people saying like, oh, like,
I mean, that sounds really similar to a lot of the people that I met in prison who felt like there were two mindsets. One was the world is conspiring against me. Like I just have to fight to survive and, at whatever cost. And then there was like a really interesting mindset of people that I met who were like, well, it's a good thing that I'm in prison because like God put me in prison to protect me from something bad that was going to happen to me otherwise. So that's that sort of pro-paranoia thinking is like, oh, they're like, oh, actually, again, because this like universal love exists thing, what is happening to me, even if it could be interpreted from the outside as a bad thing, I know that it's a good thing because there is a worse fate that would have befallen me otherwise, which is interesting.
Those people, I don't know if you sort of kept track on how they ended up, but like, did those ones end up faring better in terms of like when they got released, that they were less likely to reoffend?
I don't know. Like I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about that.
My gut would say that yes, because it's just, again, it's like a slightly happier, it seems like a healthier mindset to have under such difficult conditions, right? But
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to take up a ton of your time, so I'm just going to ask you one last question, even though I feel like we could be digging into these issues for a very long time. And also, I'm sad that I don't even know what that animal is called. What is it called again?
It's a skink, a blue-tongued skink.
A skink. Okay, I'm sad the skink is no longer with us, but okay. Resilience. I talk about resilience a lot on my podcast. Would you, in terms of poker, is resilience learning how to keep playing the game even after you've had losses and not like falling into a state of negative paranoia? And if so, what would a poker kind of lesson be about being resilient in life?
Yeah, I think that is a very beautiful definition of resilience. Resilience to me is like being, no matter whether sort of things happen, bad things happen that were outside of your control or within your control, it's the ability to sort of not get lost in it and sort of step out and observe your own actions and go, okay, so which things did which things was I at fault for? Which things can I actually control and change? And which ones were completely out of my hands? And keeping that like cool-headedness, not to completely dissociate from a problem, because you're not being resilient if you dissociate and go, I don't care. You often get people who like conflate almost like nihilism with resilience, because it's like, none of this really matters. I'm super resilient. I'm tough. I'm like, that's weak. That's faux resilience. Real resilience is allowing yourself, like being vulnerable enough to actually feel like, man, that sucked. That hurt.
That was a loss. Yeah.
That was a real loss. Ugh, I don't like it. I would like to change that. Okay, but now I've felt it. All right, now let's shake it off. Now let's figure out, okay, what did I do wrong? I actually could have done that better. What did I have nothing to do with? It was just me getting unlucky. Okay, that thing. Okay, well, I can't change that. And I just have to, poker teaches you, because ultimately it's about how do you do over the long run. I've had many games, where I felt like I was by far the best player, and I just get absolutely run over by either, I'm not playing well, but usually the deck doesn't go my way. And it's like brushing myself off, learning from the experience, and going and playing again, but a little bit better. And yeah, I think that would be my advice to people, is try and, don't let one instance determine, make you decide whether or not a thing is for you. I would try it a number of times. With sort of try different mind states as you go into it. And yeah, feel the loss. It's okay to feel bad when you lose at something. You often see like a top athletes, like they're mad when they lose, but that's because they care. They love their game, and the emotions are a part of it. My favorite games, my favorite time in poker was when I actually just let myself feel, and I wasn't trying to shut myself down and be a computer. It was when I was trying to be this computer, this like sort of ideal version of myself where I was just perfectly mathematically rational. That's not human. That's not what the experience is about. That's not what games want. Games, someone once described to me games as like what music is to sound, painting is to light, games are to thinking. They're the aesthetic form of thinking. And like, I think trying to bring that into whatever we do, even if it's not a game, if it's business, it's like, how do I make this endeavor that I'm doing an art form? And art comes with emotion and feeling and a bit of struggle and like this thing that's always evolving. That's where I think the happiness lies.
I would say if I had to give another piece of advice just based on stuff that you've said to me just now in this past hour, another one might be zoom out, right? Like we're all playing a much longer game than we realize. And like, you might feel like you've hit a really, really devastating loss. But like, if you are able to zoom out and see that there's a bigger game that you're playing that has more consequences than you may even realize, like that can help put things into perspective. I don't know if that resonates at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, we would often like with our poker winnings, we would draw a graph and like, well, it went up here and then it does this, and it's like that. And actually you'll have these big moments of loss and then a big win and so on. And if you zoom in on any little bit, it might look like the sky is falling and that's it. You're just on this terrible precipitous drop. But you zoom out and it's like, that's really what matters. It's just like, keep on zooming out when you need to. And developing the skill of like, sometimes you need to zoom in, but also zooming out. And it's just like perspective shifting. That's one of the most valuable sort of skills you can cultivate. Yeah.
Where can people follow you and find out more about you?
Yeah. My main hub right now is, you can go to my website, livboeree.com, but winwinpodcast.com, and then X. That's my very semi-addiction. As much as I try and quit it, I'm always back there, always giving my thoughts. So yeah, X is probably the best place. It's just my name, Liv_Boeree. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.